Oh my gosh, this takes forever sometimes, doesn't it, Russell? I've Russell Case on. We've been spending the last 25 minutes playing computer technology games. I bet you never thought when you went into art that you're going to have rely on so much technology to really do some of the business of art.
No, in fact, when I came into the business, the computer wasn't even a big deal, really. I should have. Now I know I should have taken more than art classes, taken a little computer science or something.
Oh, I don't know. I think the art classes paid off pretty brilliantly. So yeah, you're born in 1966, right?
Yep, 66.
Yeah. So when I was I'm a little bit older than you. When I was in college, my senior year, they had a computer course, which I took, which was Fortran. And it was just, cards that you put together, and you went to this monstrous room and you spent 3 hours to do a puzzle that you could do in 5 minutes yourself. And I thought, what application is this? This has no application. This is horrible. Little did I know.
Yeah, indeed. I wish I knew more. My kids help me out with it now.
Yeah, I bet, right? I mean, they know everything.
Yep. Yeah, sure. I call my daughter and say, hey, what's this? What's that? That's why I had such a hard time with you, is because I don't have to do much of it. They do it from that end. The problem is she doesn't live here anymore.
Yeah, I was going to say I was about at that point to say, is any of your kids around?
Yeah, I was about to call.
Anyway, we got it all under control. So tell me, Russell, I assume you're a native Utahn? How do you say, what do you say, a native?
Utah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was born in Cedar City.
Yes, that's beautiful.
Utah. Yeah.
Really brilliant.
And my dad was going to school down there. And then we didn't stay there very long, and we ended up moving north. He was playing football at Utah, or at Southern Utah, and then he came up to finish a degree in art. Got into art down there with a guy named Tom Peak, and he came up here to finish at Utah State. And he was working on a master's after that in watercolor.
Mm.
At that time, there was a real good group of watercolors coming through. Osro Allred, a guy named Steve Nagel. Have you ever run across? Steve, he was just a phenomenal. He died in a automobile accident way too early. But anyway, there was a big group of them, 5 or 8 really good painters that were coming through, and he was involved in that. And Gail Lindstrom was the professor there. You had some great traditional painters, Gail Lindstrom, Harrison Groudage, Ev Thorpe was there, another big name that was in there. But so I grew up sort of watching and looking at what he had hung around the house, and there were some pretty good things. He had traded and acquired a few paintings, and but then just before he got a master's, he got a job offer with the federal government. Right here in Brigham City, it's called it used to be the Indian School, Intermountain Indian School. It was a whole old hospital in World War I, and they turned it into a boarding school for all the reservations in this area, mostly the Navajo
and you probably.
Yeah. But there was a little bit of this and that there. But anyway, he got a job as an illustrator, kind of an illustrator back then. Let's see, this would have been the, mid 70s, late 70s. Was kind of an all-around everything. You had to draw, layout, and design, a lot of graphics, putting slide presentations together. And so he had this huge office. And I can remember going in there, and he had all kinds of things, set up. And I would just browse through all this stuff. And he had a lot of those old art magazines. I think it was I can't remember what they're called, artist magazines. And And I started looking at those, and then he had a lot of paintings because he was still painting on the side. So that's as a youngster, that was my early introduction to things you put in frames and hang on walls. It just came, from a little guy. I was just looking at that stuff.
How old were you at that time, would you think, that you really started to notice these things?
I was probably, it wasn't until I was 7 or 8, 9 that I was really noticing things like that. I remember he had this old woodcut of a house on a hill, and I'm not sure who it was, but it was kind of I used to think it was kind of spooky, and I didn't really like to sit and stare at it, or look at it. It was down in our basement. And I know now, Mark, what it was Gail Lidstrom, his professor there, was highly influenced from Edward Hopper.
Yeah.
Okay, so he had this, and he'd gotten this woodcut from somebody there that was taking classes, and it had that eerie kind of loneliness, just isolated, desperate feel to it, and I can remember growing up with that on the wall, wondering, I wonder what this is about. Why do we hang this on our wall?
Right. It brings emotions, but maybe ones I don't want.
Well, it was a little bit like uneasy, but then as I got into high school, I was always drawing, just kind of messing around with things, and he always encouraged us. He always had mediums there, but it wasn't until I was about a sophomore, junior in high school that we had a graduate student from Utah State come over, and he was giving a presentation. And as I was listening to him kind of articulate what he was trying to do, all of a sudden the dots started to connect, and I was sitting back there, and it just dawned on me, thinking about what was in my house, what my dad did, what this guy's talking about, and all of a sudden I got so excited. I was like, "Oh, I get it," And I went home that night and I says, "Dad, I want to paint. I want to paint watercolors," And he he had just gotten out of the fine art end of it, but he had the whole studio there in the house, and so he took me down, set me up a watercolor palette, and got me all organized, and showed me some old art calendar clippings and things of watercolors, and I had these little pads of watercolors, about 8 by 10s, and every night I just go down there and spend 4 or 5 hours, doing these little watercolors, and that's kind of what set the stage. That really kind of launched me into loving this craft, and looking at things and designing things and drawing things. I didn't even know what I was doing really, other than I just loved this visual imagery and the mood, and I didn't know what I was after, but I was in there just swinging, with both arms.
And that's like a sophomore in high school. Is that when that guy came?
I was probably junior by then. Yeah.
And were you doing sports and things as well?
Yeah, I was always involved in basketball, football, a little bit of baseball, but basketball took up a lot of my thoughts. I played basketball in high school and a little bit in college, and so I was always carrying that. One time, and when I got into college, I did 2 years at Snow College, a small 2-year school in central Utah, because they had such a great
basketball team.
Art department, watercolors. Also, a guy named Allred was there. But when I got there, I started, I'd always played basketball, so I went in and started playing with the guys. So I got an offer to play basketball, and I thought, well, yeah, of course. So and then the art teacher, one of the art teachers, told me one day, he says, "When are you going to give up PE, Russ, and get serious?" Serious about your painting. And I never really even thought about it, because I thought, well, what? Oh, serious about what am I going to do with it? I just figured I'd teach. I'd go through my schooling, get a teaching certificate, and land somewhere teaching art.
Yeah. And so did you take his advice and give up PE?
No way, man. We were having a great time playing ball. We were traveling all over,
Yeah, you still have fun, but you got the idea. Well, it's kind of like Howard Post. He was, I think it was probably about his sophomore year. He had done the rodeo club, right? Or rodeo's team. He was he won the all around state rodeo championship in Arizona. And he had to make a decision. Am I an artist or am I a rodeo guy? And his dad was pushing him rodeo and he really wanted to be an artist. So he went the artist route. So luckily, you're not tall enough probably to make the basketball route, but I don't know. I haven't seen your jump shot. So, you still
Oh,
got it?
yeah. I still play a little bit pickup. Yeah, just stay in shape.
Yeah, so you still have the love. I get it. That's cool. So when you were in high school, did you ever win any awards for art or middle school? Did they recognize you at that time?
Yeah, a little bit. I started painting real seriously. We had and by the time I was a senior, I moved over one valley to a place called Mountain Crest High School,
Mhm.
and they were just forming. They just built the school, and there was an art teacher there named Maurice Weiberg. Really, really good good painter, um, just good all around drawer and thinker, and he really communicated with me about what I was doing, and he got me involved in the Sterling Scholar thing. So I won the state Sterling Scholar for art.
Wow,
Uh,
the state. That's a big deal.
yeah, that was a big deal. They had a big show down at the Springville Museum, and I won the Masters Award with a watercolor I did. But before that, my dad was sending me down to Snow College. When I was just a junior in
Mhm.
high school, and I was going through their workshops. It was called Summer Snow, and Oswald Allred and Carl Purcell, painters, would bring in guest artists too, and they would do this thing for 3 weeks called Summer Snow, and you'd sign up for a week. And so I couldn't drive yet. I'd go down. There were some gals from Salt Lake that would go down. He'd take me down and dump me off with them, and I'd go down and live in the dorms and attend this thing, this workshop for Summer Snow for a week with these gals. No, we'd have a ride. They'd take care of me and cook and everything. And that's where I really got, I'd say, submerged in this, in what painting was. I would watch all Oswald and Carl paint watercolors, and then, of course, Oswald Allred came from Utah State, which was out of that
Mhm.
Edward Hopper vein from Gail Lindstrom. I didn't know any of that, but
Right.
I was seeing this mood, this capturing just kind of the realist painters, right? Of really what's going on instead of all this romance and decorative stuff. And I was really attracted to it. And so I started, of course, painting that kind of thing. And then after 2 years, after that, I ended up going to Snow College, and
Right.
then after 2 years, came back to Utah State with Gail Lindstrom and Harrison Groudage to finish up, and that's where I really uh, I kind of pulled the curtain back to where these guys were coming from. I remember the day they introduced me to Edward Hopper. I thought my professor Gail Instrument had invented all that. I was like, wow, this guy's incredible. He's a genius.
Right.
And they're like, well, have you seen Edward Hopper? And I'm like, oh, this is where all this is coming from. And then of course I got introduced to the Ashcan School and
Right.
Henry.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, I kept having these awakenings, of what's going on.
Yep. Henry, who was friends with Maynard Dixon.
Of course. And then, I had I didn't even know who Maynard Dixon was, but I was totally entrenched in this Edward Hopper feel and watercolors. And that's what I did when I got out of college. I was just painting full-time watercolors
And so when you
for a
got
long
out,
time.
yeah, so when you got out, you had a BFA in arts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so at that point, did you go, okay, I'm going to be a painter? This is what I'm doing.
Yeah. No, not even close. I was my so the professor I got connected with up there was this old boy named Harrison Groudage. What a great guy. he had been in a car wreck and he hurt one of his right arm. So he was trying to paint left-handed, but he had a hard time. He was getting older and he's having a hard time doing chores at the house. And so he'd invite me over and I'd move his firewood and do all this work. And then he'd let me have an hour to browse around his studio at the house there. And I'd go through all these things and we'd just sit and talk. So as I got to be a senior, getting ready to graduate, he's like, "What are you going to do, Case?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. Go get a master's, I guess." And why? Why are you going into education? I said, "Well, what else am I going to do? Go out?" And he said, just go paint. I'm like, "Paint? You mean paint for a living?" And he's like, "Yeah." He says, "What you do is you go get a grunt job. Just go get something that has nothing to do with art, and then paint as much as you can on the side. And as soon as you can quit your job, do it and just paint." And I'm like, "Paint?" I says, "Why not go into education?" And then he told me, he kind of explained what was going on in the education realm, how all the modern thought was coming in, and it was this big battle for control. And Utah was one of the last ones to really be infected by that. Too bad, but it came and it was coming in right then. And they were forcing these older guys, these traditional painters out, and for the new wave of
Modern art.
thinking.
Yeah.
And bad modern. I mean, I like good stuff anywhere, but the bad stuff was just, it was so polluted with there's just no room for us
Right.
people who want to paint something to look like clouds. So that's when I went home and I told my wife, I said, "Dear, I'm gonna paint for a living." The idea was I'm gonna go to graduate school and become
Right.
a professor. And man, she was like, "What?"
I bet.
Yeah, I said, "Well, that's what Grout told me to do, And so I got done with school, and she says, "All right, you applied a couple of these technical artists, like they were all computer jobs. My dad was still working in graphics and design, and she says, you apply for a couple of them, and if you don't get anything, then maybe we'll try painting." And I was already selling. I was doing a few art shows like down on the square, and I had a gallery, a little local gallery right there in Logan. And I was, we were in some of the collectors there would know where I was, and they'd come over and buy these watercolors. I had stacks of, 8x10 to 16 by 20 watercolors. They'd go through them and I'd sell them for $35 a piece,
Right.
And I said, "Well, I think I could get, if I did it serious and hit the tour with the tent and did all the towns." And she says, "No, you apply." So I applied for a couple and didn't even get a call back, and I had no experience with a computer or anything other than fine art.
Uh-huh.
So the going rate, starting salaries was I think 21,000 for those jobs.
Uh-huh.
So I didn't get a call back. She says, "All right, we'll give it a try. 1 year, you can make $21,000. If you can match that, you can keep going to the next year."
Uh-huh. Do you have kids at this point at all? When you
We
were
did. One little girl, Taylor.
Okay, so
Yeah.
there was I could see her end of it.
Oh
So
yeah, she's a little concerned. And Mark, you come through most of the universities, you don't have a clue what's going on out there in a market in the West, especially the Western
right.
side of things. And these guys are actually selling paintings and surviving. So they didn't tell us anything about what it's like. So I rented a little space in North Logan. We were at Utah State. She was finishing up school there. And man, I tell you, it was on. I painted 14 hours a day, man. I'd get out there and paint.
It was all watercolors, right, at this point?
All watercolors at this time, yeah. I'd had a little oil and acrylic in college, figure and portrait painting things. They made us paint with oil, but everything was watercolor. And I bought me a little tent and found out about the tour of the shows. You run down to all the kind of exclusive little towns, from Boulder to Park City and things, Sun Valley. And I'd do 3 or 4 of those a summer. And it was good. It was a good time and enjoyed it. And I kind of kept doing that, and then I'd establish a few more galleries. I got in a good gallery in Salt Lake. She started, Linda Southam, and she started selling my paintings. And um, but with watercolor, Mark, I couldn't quite tap into the kind of the big league. It was just,
Right.
you know,
They don't bring the money.
yeah, I just couldn't open the door. And of course, I didn't know that at the time, but I was just swinging away, and we were doing pretty good. We'd moved down to Salt Lake area, Farmington, and there was a lot. And I met some clients there, lifelong clients and friends that were collecting. And it wasn't until I did a show down in Phoenix, the big celebration tent show.
Mm-hmm.
You go down there for 2 months and you just hang out, right?
Right. That's
So
hard work, right? I mean, tell people how hard that is to sit
oh my
and
word, you talk about brutal.
lug and art.
You're on location. You're sitting there in a studio situation, but yet you're a storefront. It feels like you're in a zoo. People come by and look at you, and you look at them and wave, but they just want to keep looking, and so it's just there's 100 artists in this great big tent, and you're there working every day of the week, but then also selling and
Right.
and talking, and I'll tell you, after a while it becomes kind of a hard deal. You put 100 artists together in a tent for 2 months and have them compete for sales. Come on, can you imagine some of the?
Oh, I can only imagine. I'll give you 50% off right here. Come on over.
Somebody come walking in your tent and start talking to your clients, and you'd be like, "Hey, I'm doing business here," and they'd be like, "Oh, come on over. I'll show you one like that." I mean, it was crazy. Yeah. But I did that for 2 years. The second year I was down there, I was watching these oil painters having a good time. It seemed like they just push this paint around. And, I'm with watercolor. Of course, you're real careful to control everything because you're saving the whites. That's and these guys were just throwing paint around, and man, that looked fun. I was like, are you kidding? That looked easy. I was like, and I got home. Well, while I was there, towards the end of the time, there was a guy down there that had come down with some guys from Utah. His name was Homer Clark. Now you know who Homer Clark is, don't you?
Yeah.
He was a physician, a personal physician for Howard Hughes. This was a big old guy, and he was so eccentric. I mean, it just
Right.
he just speak his mind. He built violins. He was a painter, and he was a physician. Well, and his parents and his family knew Maynard Dixon, and they'd collected art. He had a whole bunch of drawings of his, and anyway, he just had a huge background in all that. I didn't know him from Boo. He walks in my booth, and he looks around, and I had some full sheet watercolors there that were reminiscent of Dixon, but I didn't know Dixon yet. I hadn't looked at his things. I was just painting what I saw. And my dad had taken me. When he was at Intermountain, see, he was working with the Bureau to go around to the reservations and set up educational programs. And so I had traveled around with him to all these places, Four Corners, Canyon de Chelly, the first, second Mesa out on the Hopis and things. And he had pictures and things, of all this stuff. And so I was really drawn to it, and I'd been painting that. And Homer Clark come in and saw him, and he says, he looked over at me and he says, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm Russell. Who are you?" And he says, he didn't even answer me. He just looked through the paintings, and all of a sudden he looked back and he says, "You know who Maynard Dixon is?" And I said, "No." And he looked back at the art and walked around a little bit and didn't say a word and just headed off. Boom, boom, down. I watched him head down the path there. I thought, who is that? What was that about? The next day, he comes walking into my booth that morning with one of Dixon's books. And he opens it up and he plops it down in front of me. "This is Maynard Dixon. Take a look at it." And he leaves. And man, I started looking through that, and I'm like, Mark, I knew the places. Half those places I had visited or driven by, and I was just like, oh my word, it just blew my mind, and just opened up, this whole world for me. And I was just intrigued, and I went and looked him up. He had a booth in there with some other guys, and he was over on the other side of the tent. I went back and found him, and I'm like, all right, I want the rest of the story here.
Uh-huh.
Who is Maynard Dixon, and what is this, and we spent the rest of the time just interacting. He told me about stories and told me who he was, and just kind of gave me the whole art background of the West, and from that perspective. And man, so when I got home that year, that second time down there, I was burnt out on watercolor, and I really didn't want to mess with the medium right then. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to paint with some of these oils. They look so fun, to direct, put it there, and it stays there. It doesn't run around. It doesn't change value. So I started painting with some oils, and it was so fun. I still had to go back to the watercolor because I figured that was the only way I could make the living still. But man, every chance I got, I was painting in oils. And then pretty soon I couldn't go back to the watercolor. And so I'm off and running in the new medium, and I'm doing the shows, and I'm introducing them, and they're really taking off pretty good. I'm seeing that people think they're more serious,
Yeah.
and they don't have glass.
Is this like the late kind of 80s, 86, 88? So when was this kind of time?
Oh, this would be, see, I graduated high school 84, 5, 86. Yeah, this would be the late 80s.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
And so they're starting to get noticed by other galleries, more important galleries.
yeah. I'm still doing, like, the Prescott show and some things like that actually have their foot in the door. Some pretty good people like Bill Anton and Ed Mell live down there. And in fact, I was doing the Prescott show that year, and Bill Anton and Ed Mell were the judges for the show. They'd give awards out, and I won, best of show for an oil painting I did.
Wow. And those boys have good vision. They know what they're looking at too.
Well, and I didn't really know who they were.
Right,
They had a painting or two of Bill's there, some night scenes of Cal, and I was like, wow, that is sweet. And anyway, so after the judging, they do it before the show. Well, he comes kicking around the show there, and I met him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man. And so we got to know each other a little bit. He invited me out to the house. In fact, we ended up trading. He some of my small watercolors, we ended up trading for a couple of his studies. And I went out to his studio, and so I got to know, I kind of got a real look at serious, good quality painting of Western, and that how you make a living at it and stuff like that. So anyway, some of my best advice from Bill Anton early was, I says, well, Bill, I want to be an oil painter. And a landscape oil painter. And he said, go outside and paint. That's what he told me. He said, just go outside and paint on location. And I took it, I was like, all right. And man, I'd go outside, 4 or 5 times a week. And anyway, that was kind of some of the early. And he told me, I says, how do I really learn the medium though? And I said, do you teach? And he says, no, but and then he guided me into taking some from some of the best ones, like Skip Whitcomb. Matt Smith was one of the most important workshops I ever took.
I bet.
And they taught me how to transition from this, from transparent watercolor into opaque medium, which that's what I was struggling with at the time.
Mm.
That was and then shortly after that, I got noticed by a couple major dealers and people that knew the national scene instead of just the Utah, kind of the local scene.
Right. And who were those dealers?
Well, my first introduction to somebody that's serious about this was Paul Bingham.
Yeah.
I met him through another friend. It was kind of like a train wreck. Our first meeting, it was interesting. He just come from San Jose, you know, an open place in Salt Lake,
Right.
and me and a client went in to. He says, "Hey, Russ," this client says, "Hey, come check this new dealer out, Salt Lake." And so we went rolling in there. You know, we were just in our jeans and shirts, and Paul takes the dealing very serious, you know, and I didn't know him.
Right.
But we were looking at the things, you know, he had a lot of, a few early California things, and he had this Dixon 1620 Hemingway wash right there. And me and Mike Edson's his name, Dr. Edson was there standing in front of it. And Paul was getting ready for a show that night, and he was real busy, and he was the only one in there. And we were kind of, and Mike was kind of talking to him, and he wanted to introduce me to him. And Paul saw he could see the writing on the wall right away, and he invited us to leave because he was busy. and we both left there going, holy cow, how's he going to do art here when he runs off his clients? Of course we became very dear friends, and
Right.
Mike Edson ended up buying that painting, Hemingway wash. They still own it, by the way, from Paul Bingham later. But
That's great.
But Paul knew how to take me and nurture me and encourage me in the right direction, and then introduce me to more of a national market. He did the LA art show every year.
Yes.
When it was kind of a real deal. And
I used to do that show. I did that for quite a
yeah.
while. And it was.
So he took me there and brought me in and you know, introduced me to some of his big clients, and yeah, it was just and after about 3 years, you know, he really set the stage with it. And then he introduced me to a guy named Jeff Mitchell.
Yeah, Jeff. Yeah,
Jeff.
Yes, with Jeff.
Right. And Jeff was really kind of being able to take me to the next place. He had a retail gallery in Scottsdale at that time, you know, Mitchell Brown Fine Art, and
Yep.
we would have shows, and he only handled like 3 or 4 contemporary artists. And so that was really nice. He does a lot of things behind the scenes, so he was able to introduce my work to the right.
I think that's where I saw your work, probably was through Jeff, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, because Jeff and I did deals together. And because we both really like Dixon. And I think that may have been where it was. I remember when he was I remember him showing your work. So I don't know if I'd seen it before and then he went, maybe I did. But I remember Jeff seemed to have, you know, made sure people saw it.
Yeah. Yeah, he was so wise in the business, and just able to kind of bring me in the right way and market it and just do everything, and yet just give me my space and tell me to paint, you know, and then introduce me to artists. You know, I remember the time I walked in his house, and he had a big Chauncey Ryder, this real contemporary Chauncey. Oh, it was beautiful. I was like, man, you know. So anyway, I got introduced to a lot more of the taste of, you know, of art history and the American painters, and then tonalists and all this, and that was really good. And then as Jeff kind of retired from the retail end of it, he handed me off to Gerald Peters and Overland Gallery, which was, you know, really, really good.
And now Overland Gallery's gone. And
Man,
has been for a while.
Yeah, that was the greatest thing since sliced bread for me. You know, they carried 5 of us, and
yeah, like Ed Mell, Gary Ernest Smith.
Yeah.
I don't know who else. Yeah, it was a very good gallery. And you're still with Jerry Peters, right?
No, I just moved over to Legacy when they opened a place there.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
And they all did great for me, man. It's just unbelievable. I think, you know, the only reason Jerry kind of went in another direction, more the modern feel with his museum, but we had some great shows, and he did wonderful things.
Yeah, I always used to love those shows, and I'd go see them because we had a gallery then, and you'd come in and see me in Santa Fe.
Oh, that's right. Yep, that's
Yep.
right.
It was
All
always
right.
on my list, no matter what, because it was usually around Indian market-ish time frame that I would go out and make sure I saw your work. And I was always blown away. There would be like 2 or 3 that I'd be like, oh my God, this guy's so good.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark.
I've just been a fan of your work since I guess since when I very first saw it. It's just, you can see, you have your own vision. It's so clear, but there's this element that I get the same way I get with Dixon, that you go, okay, he's really portraying it, how his mind views it. And you're capturing whatever that is, you're capturing that essence of the land, and the light. Yeah.
Well, thanks. When people say, well, who's your favorite, it's hard to say. All of them had, I mean, Edgar Payne did some things that I think are just
Right.
the way he used, the way he mixed paint and limited palette and things like that. It just, but Dixon, when you look at his small work, his field studies, even those 12, 16, 1620s that he did on location, one time and out, he was recording marks and passages with paint, and to me it's just a music, it's like a symphony that I don't get with a lot, that's what excited me, was his way of recording what he wanted to, so simplistically and directly. That's another thing. I mean, some of those paintings you can see around him, the tone canvas or just the white canvas
Right.
that he was working on. He didn't build these things up in kind of like a formula painting, where you do this, then you do that. He was just looking at what he saw, knew where he was going, could see the story, could hear the music, and he was recording this. And man, those strokes, that that calligraphy quality that gets in it, to me, that's another step beyond the like Henry would talk about. Sometimes we see beyond the ordinary, and when he was recording those instantaneously from life and then done, there's just something so fresh and so alive there. I mean, that color that you can't always get in the studio. It's just, I've just always been intrigued, and so um, that's the direction I've always wanted to go with a lot of that kind of work, is just to be able to capture that directness that he showed us. But then, I look at his work and I notice he was looking at other people's work.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you look at hoppers and bellows, those small things they did, those field studies and things in Maine and along the coast, man, they had the same,
Yeah.
they had the same purpose, but they're doing different subjects.
Yeah.
They
And
have the
Dixon
same quality.
he knew both those guys, and he knew Bellows for sure. And he had been in his studio. And if you look at his Dixon's social realism period from 34 to 35, you see Bellows' influence all over it. I mean, it's just
Oh, sure.
completely. Yeah. You look at, Scabs, and then you compare it to, Bellows' boxing painting from 1909 from the Stag bar, I mean, boxing era. There's clearly they are. Not only that, but Dixon is using this symmetrical dynamic symmetry, which is a modified thing that came right out of Henry and Bellows, but he kind of modified it himself, and you can see it for sure. So he's looking for sure at other people as well.
Oh, yeah, I think, and then for him to, to use other people's minds, Martin Luther said, "I'm a fool not to read, because then I don't use other people's minds." And so he comes out west, he's out west and he's looking at this landscape. And that's why when I look at those, those 12, 16, 1620s that he did out sitting there in the sagebrush,
Right.
that are almost empty, right? A lot of people look at that, they don't get it. So it'll just be a low horizon with a cloud wisp and a simple,
Right.
narrow mesa back there. And it's just like Hopper was when he was painting those empty street scenes. It just has the same mood of what we experience out there to me.
Well, you introduced something to me that I had never thought about, or I think even heard at the Prix de West when you were showing me your paintings and you were describing the music, the when you look at these paintings, you can see the beats, which I had never thought of. And I actually have to go and look at Dixon's paintings now and that with that mindset. And it's probably, those beats are probably what I'm feeling between yours and his. And maybe you could tell, the listeners about that, because I find it fascinating when you describe how you do and look and feel at these paintings with regards to music.
Yeah, well, I wish I could take credit for it. The first place I heard it was a demo from Clyde Aspavig. But yeah, as I started to see that, and compare things to music or writing, mostly music, there's breaks. If you have one sound and it's just continuous, it's monotony. And so to look down a mesa with no breaks, or a sagebrush flat with no openings, but as soon as you start to make holes and create length of distances in anything, space, relationships to shape, to me, what I see when I look across, let's just say a mesa face, and it has cracks and shadows, the distance between those shadows are spaces, musical spaces. And so we as painters, we will control those spaces and times, like a musical time. We'll put some close together and then break one up and then another close. And then, we're doing the same thing with areas. I mean, it's a little harder to kind of verbalize than it is with music. If we sit in front of musical notes and play them on a piano, time is everything, and how long you hold the note and short the note. So with painting, it's the same thing. So what I'm trying to relate it to is, say, a Dixon, a very simplistic painting of his would, on location, the foreground would be just some marks of sagebrush. But if you notice how he arranges that simple arrangement, 3 close together, 1 off to the right, and then 1 in back, and then it will be a long distance between, and then another one here, and then maybe a long line that are back of those. So he's using all those different shapes and movements between those. Everything, some people talk about negative shape and positive shape, but everything is positive shape. So the shape between shadows, or the shape between sagebrush, as we paint, that's what we're composing with, is what I think of. I'm putting a lot in this area here and a little bit over there, so that the leading lady can do her thing, and then everything in the painting can kind of harmonize with that. But then when you take atmospheric perspective into play, like distance, I can't use these colors in the foreground that I use in the background, because then it flattens. So I'm using 3-dimensional space, but I'm using all these other elements too in design. I mean, it's just there's so much you can do with it. You can flatten it out, like Dixon ended up doing later in his life, where he was more interested in the pattern, or you can paint more, it's more about air and space, but you're still using these breaks in placement. And so when I see his simple paintings, which a lot of people would just kind of glance at and walk by, if you really start to look at them, the thought, or maybe it's just the years and years of playing with those. It's like somebody that can sit down at a piano, who doesn't need any music, and they can just start making up, music. And you're just like, man, how do you do that? Well, that's what he would do outside. He would all he needed was the inspiration in front of him, and he would use all these elements. And simplify down to just what he wanted to show us and just what he wanted to say. And so music, and it's the way I look at things a lot in just um, in the way of music, and how when you're listening to music, when it dies down, especially like if you take the words out, you just listen to classical music, and it'll almost go silent, and all of a sudden the drums start, doom, doom, and then all of a sudden the violins come in and bring us up, and then all of a sudden it's back to this hard rhythm, and it's taking us somewhere, telling us that the action's happening, but then all of a sudden it falls off, boom. And that's where, as you look across the face of a cliff, that's what the shadows do to me. They're talking about the emphasis, but they're also leaving me in those quiet areas that I can enjoy the busyness of some shadow, but then there's other areas that are so quiet. So I hope that communicates what
I get it.
trying.
No. And I mean, when you see it, you see a symphony, I'm sure. When you see the right light and the right shadows and the right colors and the right location, it is a symphony that's playing in front of you, and you just have to record it.
Yeah, if you can just pull that in and understand that, what we're dealing with as artists, with the elements, shape, value, form, color, texture, line, and then how are we using those to convey this? That's why it gets a little frustrating with the modern movements that don't want, oh, well, that's been painted
Right.
plenty. Yeah, but it's not been painted like Dixon did, right? It's not been painted like Whistler did, right?
Or you did. And well, I think you also have to take into consideration you've spent your entire life in Utah, in the West, outside looking. That gives you a completely different interpretation than any other human being, and gives you an advantage, in my opinion, to be able to really if you're an observant person, which you are, to capture those moments in a way that no one else can.
Well, that's the hope, right? And you just have to hope that all comes through in this language as you develop your craft and your vision of what it is you're trying to do. I mean, some of the best things I read were like where Henry says, if you're looking to be unique, don't even think about it. Just go out and do it, and then you come out. And so, painting on location feeds that, because you can't sit out there and say, okay, I'm going to make this decision because of that, because of this, because of that, and as that changes, I'm going to do this. You just go out and you kind of work from whatever's in there, whatever you can't think all that much. And so you are coming out, plus all these instincts that you've developed, the muscle memory, the ideas of the big concepts. And so when I work on location, I don't really do it to use as inventory for shows or anything. I'm just doing it to keep developing hopefully, the way I'm doing things, and then I can see it. And then I'll look at these paintings, I keep them in the studio and just study them, because I know why I made the decisions I did. And then I look back and I say, well, that was the right decision. I just didn't take it far enough, or whatever. I can actually grow. I can actually see myself develop in that, where in other situations, it's hard to know. Like people will say, oh, that's a Russell Case painting. I'll be like, I don't even know what they're seeing or looking at. I'm like, oh, well, I hope so, because I signed it. But they'll be, they mean something else. And I want to be able to see that now and then too. And from working on location, I feel like now I get to see really what I know, what I do, and who I am from those. And I try to incorporate that into my big work as much as possible. But that can be a different animal.
I was going to say, is that something that you have in the last, I don't know, decade has really come through for you? Because we grow as humans, hopefully we should, that component of seeing these smaller pieces really influencing and showing you the way to do the big studio pieces?
And I hope so, Mark. I don't know. There's times you think you kind of got a vein you're running down, and then all of a sudden, you wonder, you look around, you're like, I don't even know where I'm going or what I'm doing. I think it does apply, because when I'm working out a design on a big painting, what have I got to fall back on other than, what I've done in the past and why, and good or bad, all those mistakes, they say, add up to something. You don't keep making them, hopefully.
Right.
And so as I go to make a mark, say just to divide a landscape by a horizon line, I think I've done it there too many times. And I've done it there in this, but then I'm doing it because it's a sky painting. So, and then the next time I'll say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this, but they all build on each other. If that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. That's like anything, right?
Yeah.
Even in my business, I see a piece, I go, oh yeah, I recognize that. I remember why that was, and maybe I did the research or figured it out, or what that basket was, or whatever that painting was. You build on those. You have to build on it. That's why you get better with age. I think you're doing your best work now. At least that's how I see it. I mean, the stuff I saw at Prix de West was just exceptional.
Well, thanks. And that's what I hope, but when you're close to it, like I'm seeing it in the studio for months, and I'm just
Right.
like, you get so sick of it. You're like, and then I get away from it for 4 months, and I walk in the show, in the Prix de West, and I'm like, oh, I can see it for what it is. And actually, a lot of the things I was so caught up on just kind of go away. And I'm like, why was I so worried about this and this and this and those are the things I think you build on and learn. You say, well, I'm so worried about this, and that's not even an important part of the painting. And then to take things from other artists, like some of the biggest influences and growth, I guess I should say, I think in my work was when I was painting and kind of being, if you will, mentored a little bit. They didn't know it, but being mentored by somebody like Len Schmiel.
Right.
I met Len 20 something years ago, and we would paint occasionally through the year together, but just watching what he did on location, well, in the studio too, just watching how he designs, and then just a few things he would tell me with color, just completely changed. That's all I need was, is a little bit of information, and all of a sudden that opens this whole spectrum of understanding, just like Mark, just to understand what phthalos do when they bring intense hue. And other artists, other people had said, don't use phthalos because they're stains and they mess, they get everywhere. And Len would just say, well, who puts them there? And it would get me thinking so if I want to mix a real light value, but I want chroma in it, then why would I use earth tones? Use phthalos, and then I can change temperature just slightly without changing value. And it was just little things like that. It would just be like, okay. And these guys are doing it secondhand. He just knows how to, and he knows how to use harmony in color. I mean, Mark, that's an endless. It's like music theory. You can't get to the end of it. It was so wonderful to have somebody, Len and Skip Whitcomb introduced me to controlling my palette, limited palette, and why.
Yes.
And then the variances you can get are endless in between those just 3 colors. And then I start to look at Dixon's work, and I'm like, he knew this.
Yeah, he did.
He's using this. Look at how simple that works with this. And it's just like, so all those things.
Yeah, the painting that Len,
just,
I was going to say the painting that Len had in the Prix de West that won the award, that showed that endless amount you can do with a small range of colors and what's possible.
Right.
That was really quite a brilliant piece, but it was simple.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you
Yeah,
go
that's
around something like Prix de West, where you have so many great artists, I mean, what do you think when you see these individuals? Are you trying to take things away, or do you just absorb it for what it is as a collector kind of a view? Or can you take that artist component out?
yes. And sometimes, I mean, I think it's really important to see, for me, it is to go and watch, especially somewhere like the Prix de West where everybody's kind of bringing their A game,
Right.
um, and see what they're doing to push the envelope or to just try to invent. And so in some cases, but for me, it's real important to keep me. I realize that, oh man, because sometimes when you live in a vacuum, in your studio,
Right.
you kind of start to think that the world revolves around you. And then when you walk into a place like that, it's kind of like a punch in the mouth. You're like, oh my word, these guys are good. They know what they're doing. I'm like, oh, I wonder if I'll ever be able to do that, to simplify like that. Or you walk up to a Carlson,
Yeah. Oh
and
my
I'm like,
God. Yeah.
it looks so stinking simple, but I don't even know why he's doing what he's doing and how, and it's so beautiful. And so yeah, you're constantly, you're picking up things, you're seeing things, you're like, oh, but then you're also I think forming, and helping form this social attitude of the West and the paintings, and all these things are so important. I think, Mark, even like yourself, to be a person who's promoting, and you promote a lot other than just two-dimensional art, but our craft, which is Western, and even my craft, which is mostly the desert, the Southwest paintings, landscape. Oh my word, we need that to survive and to actually to broadcast what we are doing. I mean, how else do these generations learn and see this, and we keep it out there and alive if we're not into museums, into like you're doing, where you're dealing with people all the time, you're trying to educate people, you're taking someone like Maynard Dixon and propping that up, someone that is a classic, that is good, and you're keeping those things alive. And so those shows, when I see them, it's just so important for me to remember, that we're all, not all of us, but there's a lot of different flavors in there, but a lot of us that are kind of running in the same direction can kind of use each other and help each other, encourage this craft to be out there and be seen, be educated about.
Yeah. It's one of our true American art forms, is the West, whether it's landscapes or the people or the indigenous or the cowboy or whatever you want to say. I mean, that is America. It's the art scene. Yes, we have abstract art. Yes, we have Pollock, but we also have people like Maynard Dixon and yourself and Ed Mell and all these other individuals who are showing, something that is really American.
Yeah, I think that's the becomes the battle anymore of for the mind and the worldviews of what we're doing and why. Actually,
Yes.
I'm of late I've become more interested in kind of the philosophy about all this stuff, in like what actually we're representing and why. And I think, and it's fun to talk about. It's fun to think about, and I just want to keep it on their plates, so that traditional painting isn't just lumped into this as a has been. We're going to cancel it. This is cancel culture, and that's the first thing that goes is, you know, and I don't think it is. I think people, like, even though I don't do paintings like, say John Coleman,
Right.
man, he is helping sound the horn, of this Western tradition, and what it's about, and it's about a lot. And so people like Dixon and Payne and even the American painters, Mark. I think we should embrace, like you have. Listening to your lecture when we were down there in Tucson, that was, to me, that was so brilliant and important to tie these guys into the American movements. We share so much in common, the good stuff.
Yeah.
To bring them through, and let it be our heritage. Let the tonalists, the Pennsylvania guys, let all those, they were great painters doing the same problems that we're painting with. We're just looking at different landscapes, different temperatures, different things. But I think it's when you divert from that and you say, no, there are no guardrails to this. It's just about you interpreting you and do whatever you want, and you leave. And then all of a sudden it's just like, well, then I guess you define, instead of, no, there is purpose in this, and there is a way to look at a Maynard Dixon painting in his glory, pick out his best 5 things.
Right.
Well, how are you going to do that? There has to be a criteria, Mark. There has to be a way to say, no. Now we can vary a little bit, but when you throw that out, and that's what I hear in some of the venues, they want to get away from of anything that's traditionally sound. But we can talk about that another.
Yeah, I don't think that's happening. I think the Western art and native art is on solid footing and will continue to be embraced. I do. Because you want to talk to anybody in Germany or Japan or France, and you want to say, well, what's the West? Well, they'll say, oh, well, it's saguaros and it's big open skies and it's, Indians and cowboys, and, they already have the perceived image. That is what Western art is. And that's never going away as far as I can see.
Well, I hope so. And then just to keep that classic, good, like when we talk about the Taos painters, and you look at those guys from say even Sharp to Burning House, or not to Burning, Victor Higgins.
Right.
Okay, there's room for modern thinking, right, and invention, but we don't have to abandon everything to just say, well, because we need to make it relevant. Right. No, that was good. Those guys were good. Blumenschein, look at what he was doing with.
Who was friends with Dixon, by the way. They were good friends.
Yeah.
In New York back, they were good friends in New York when they were both doing illustrations. So that's the spectrum. You can go from Sharp to Blumenschein, and it's still the same thing, still Western, and still being true to who they are. They're just incorporating different sensibilities of what they're exposed to and how they see the world and how they want their craft to evolve. Because everybody's crafts, including yours, I'm sure, if you looked at your early work to now, you go, wow, different guy.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you just get a better skill set. You see things that you like. You talk to Shamil and says, keep your palette limited. Do this, do that. You take these little things in, and because you're a master at what you do, you can tweak it just the slightest amount, and you can see change and growth. I'm sure you do all the time.
Yeah, what I see sometimes out there is this reintroduction of things like Blumenschein and Victor Higgins, and they call it the New West. It's the new, and I'm like, no, you don't understand. Those things came from the East. Those were, part of, like, that's why I think it's so important to understand the foundation and roots. A lot of that was happening in those salon shows back East with, and the Ashkens. When Henry and these guys came out of that, they were considered heretics.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, and now we're reintroducing things that those guys were doing well, and they're calling it new, which is fine with me. I'm just saying, well, just know that we're looking at those guys. Right. We're looking at Dutton and how he stylized cottonwoods and things like that. And we're, people, and there's good young painters come along there. that's what I'm excited about, that are carrying these torches, like Brett Allen Johnson,
Yeah, no, he's one of the best.
Yeah, he's a great example of a solid draftsman who's got a vision, but he's using, he's seen what he likes from the past, and he's coming into his own. Man, it's just, I'm excited about when I see things like that.
Yeah, I agree. Very much so. So as we kind of finish up, do you have a couple little things? What would you say to young artists that might be kind of starting in on this journey and are in, investigating, doing, and they like Western art, they like more realism. What would you say suggestion wise for them for their career, just like you got suggestions from Bill Anton and others over the years? A tough question, I know.
I'd say go outside and paint.
Yeah.
If they're involved in landscapes or even figurative thing, then get to the source. Paint from life, and then get upstream on the stuff and find out where it's coming from. That was what was exciting when I could see. I keep banging this drum, but like where the American painters were, and then how that, and then as the European stuff came over to California and stuff, and how these things collided, to trace back those roots and know what you're doing. If you're drawn to say tonalism, someone like that they're incorporating, but they don't even know what tonalism is,
right,
or impressionism. They kind of dance. Just keep reading and studying these movements in America to know. And then I think what you do is you get back to the root of where these came from and what they were saying with them, and then it can really make your work solid and understandable to you. It can help you clarify what you're doing and why. And then to look at good stuff, get to the museums, get to the galleries, look at the paintings, look at them in the flesh, and so study the movements, that the brushstroke and the design aspects firsthand, and then push your way into some of your heroes. Like for me, it was, Matt and Lenny and these guys, and luckily I got invited to, Matt Smith invited me to a workshop with James Reynolds before he passed.
Oh yeah.
That's how I met Len Schmill. And so what you do is you get to the shows, you get to the places they're happening, and you pick brains and take some workshops from your favorite, just pay attention to what's going on and why. So I'd say get outside and paint, and then work big too. You got to work up. If you can't, to me, it was when I was doing kind of major work, that the big museums and places when they want to collect your work, they want a major work, and that's bigger than a 1620, or a 2024. So,
yeah, I've noticed that in your work too, that you've gotten bigger, and the big work is really, it seems to have a consistent exceptionality to it, that I'm always drawn into the biggest pieces that you've done for whatever reason, but you've managed to conquer that demon, in my opinion.
Thanks. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder.
Yeah, no, I do. I like your big paintings. And people, if they're still listening, if there's a big painting right still at Prix du West that they can go and look at too, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a stunner. It's an absolute stunner. So I would. Where can people find you, by the way, if they want to? Do you have an Instagram or email? I mean, website and things you want to share?
Yeah, I'm. My daughter's running my all my computer stuff. She's running my website, and she does Instagram. She's pretty busy on that, so they can find me through that, or you just Google my name, and I do have a website. And I've got some, strategic galleries in the West. I don't know if you want those, but
yeah, sure, give them out.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's see. I always miss one when I do this, Mark, and it kills me later. But in Jackson Hole, it's Astoria with Greg, Astoria Fine Art, and then of course in LA, Maxwell Alexander Gallery. Bo's doing a lot of things right now, and then Brad with Legacy in Scottsdale and Santa Fe.
Yep.
And here in Utah, I still work with the Bingham Fine Art down there with Susan. She's still at the Bingham place, and then with Dave Erickson in Salt Lake, we still do something every couple of years. Let's see if I covered I know I'm missing something.
And occasionally we get a nice piece when we get to do something.
Right.
Yep, we always like to have one.
Birds of a feather. We can't. I don't think we can stay apart.
Yeah,
I
great.
love what you do, Mark.
I love what you do, and you love my stuff. So it's a nice synergy, no doubt, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Russell, anything else you want to say before we call it a day?
Oh, I just appreciate the opportunity, Mark. It's always an honor.
Oh, thank you. No, I really was looking forward to talking to you, just to hear your backstory. And, I think you have a good, deep emotional connection to art and how to paint. And it came through for sure on this podcast. I felt it. And I think others will as well.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you.
All right. We will be talking soon, my friend. Take care.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Give my best to your wife.
I will. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye. Russell called me afterwards and he goes, I left out something very important. I wish you could add it in. Here's Russell's words.
And Mark, I want to tell you what a great blessing it is to have a wife who supports you and believes in what you're doing and makes it possible for all of this. So Suzanne, my lovely wife, Taylor, my oldest daughter, Morgan, my other daughter, and Cooper, my youngest son, been a huge support in my life. And my two son-in-laws, Nick Winder and Dane Walker. What a blessing to have in my life. And my Lord Jesus, who's made all this possible, even the breath I have to speak. I've been so blessed. Thank you.